So in the last tutorial, we were able to move our camera around using the arrow keys. So this tutorial, let's focus on working on actually shooting. So what I'm going to do here is go up to Shooting Game and right click and create another folder and call it Prefabs. And let's go ahead and uncheck play. And I'm going to go ahead and go to Game Object, create Other, and make a sphere. Now, be conscious of the size of your sphere in relation to your cube, because this is going to be the bullet that's going to actually knock down our cubes. So size it up the way you like it, and go ahead and in the prefabs folder, create another folder and call it bullet. And inside that folder, create a prefab called bullet. And right next to it, create another material and just call it bullet material. And it's important that you keep make as many folders as you like, but just keep it as organized as you can. Okay? So do you remember in our code how we added we made a variable with a rigid bodied component? Now we want to do that with our bullet because when we're coding it, we're actually going to script that the different properties that are attached to that rigid body. So if we go to component physics, now mind you I have the sphere selected, and I go to rigid body, you'll see here that a rigid body, just like if you remember back at our space, we kind of covered this, but to review it has mass, drag, angular, and all the other stuff. So if I press play, it'll fall because it has gravity. So let's uncheck gravity for now so that when we press play, it doesn't fall. Alright, the next thing I want to do is grab this sphere and drop it on top of the bullet here, and then I'm going to grab this bullet here and bullet material and drag it on top of my bullet. So let's delete our sphere from here, and I'm just going to make my bullet, let's scroll down a little bit and let's just give it a color. I'm a big fan of like purples and blues, so I'll do a purplish blue. Alright, so on our main camera, I'm just going to go ahead and drag this bullet onto the rigid body. Alright. Alright, so within our script, now we have, let's go ahead, let's do this right. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out by putting 2 forward slashes and saying this code moves our camera. And then I'm going to write another one and say this code fires our projectile when the left mouse button is pressed. Okay, so remember when we covered if statements. So what we want to say here is if open close parentheses, open close curly braces, if input, and here's that input again, dot, now we don't want get key or get access, we want get button down. So when I press my button, which is going to be the left mouse button, you know what, we'll do get button up. This way once we release it, it'll fire off. Now this is a pre-made method, so I know that there's a pre-made property called fire1, and this is mapped to the left mouse button. So all it's saying is if I press the left mouse button, then release it, do something. Now we learned this the hard way, that we actually have to store in a variable the actual location of a button, or the location of the bullet being born. And then we actually have to send it into space. So we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to give it the data type rigid body. And we're doing that in here because our bullet has a rigid body attached to it. And I'm going to call it instance. Now, the reason it's called instance is this is where every time we press the left mouse button, the bullet is going to be born or spawn. So I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to type in instantiate, open close parentheses, and a semicolon. Now, what do we want to instantiate? Now, if I hold my mouse over this, maybe it'll do it, maybe it won't. Let's see. And it doesn't look like it popped up, but we can actually go here and just go to help. And it'll show us object instantiate. You can see that it has 3 parameters. Whatever the object is, the position of the object, so this would be 3 numbers, because remember it's a vector position, and so x, y, and z for the position, and then the rotation. So let's go ahead and write that out. So we know what we want, right? We have a variable up here called bullet, so I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so we got that. Next we need a position. I want it to be spawned from the actual position of the camera. So if you remember from our other code, we remember the code name translate or transform, which will allow us to access the current transform. So we have to write that again. So transform okay, and you can see that now it actually pops up. So it says the vector 3 position, so we have to say transform dot position. And you probably guessed this. We're going to do transform dot rotation. Alright, so let's test this out for a second. So I'm going to press play, and let's see, where am I? Rigid body instance, instantiate bullet prefab. Oh, I forgot one line of code. So we have to actually tell it what we are spawning it as. So we have to write as rigid body. Alright, let's hit Control S here. So all we're doing here is we're creating a variable, and that variable is storing what we're instantiating, the position and the rotation. And when you write as rigid body, it just adds on that it is a rigid body object. Alright, so let's test this out. So there we go. Okay, error's gone. So let's press play. And as I move this around, you can see the bullet is appearing and it's falling. It's actually moving out of the wrong position. So let's go ahead and let's actually send it towards our cube. So what I'm going to do to my cube is I'm going to go to component, physics, and I'm going to add a rigid body to that. And I'm going to check off use gravity. Alright, so let's go ahead and move our rigid body forward. Right now it just spawns at the exact center position of our camera. So we can do that by simply creating another variable, and it stores the forward position. Alright, so let's hammer out a few lines of code here. So first let's create a variable called forward, and I'm going to make it the data type vector3, and that'll allow it to store any of the position, like rotation or translation, that we want. So it can actually store any of this by just giving it the data type vector3. Alright, so we'll make it all lowercase, forward, and we'll make it equal to the object that it's added to, which is the camera. So the transform dot transform direction and then we want to make it equal to vector3 dot forward. Okay, so let me explain this to you. All this is doing right now is it's not actually moving our bullet. So if I hit Control S right now and I press play, you're not going to notice a difference. All this is doing is this variable forward is storing what direction is forward. That's all it's saying. So it's storing this direction right here. So let's select our camera. It's storing the z-axis. So the next line of code, all it's going to do is we're going to do instance dot add force. And remember, instance is actually what's storing the current rigid body location. So rigid body instance, and that's where we're instantiating our bullet. Dot add force. So we're going to just do forward, which is the forward direction, times power. And if you don't remember what power is, power we created earlier. That's up here. It's 1500. So let's go ahead and hit Control S and let's press play. And now when I right click, you can see I've created a simple shooting game, and it allows me to kind of shoot this cube. Alright. What we can do, if you guys would like, is hit Control D and then hold Control, and you can snap these. See how I'm kind of snapping these cubes? And so now when I press play, we have kind of a little bit better of a shooting game. Alright, so let's actually do one more thing. Let's create a prefab for this cube. And we'll call this enemy. And within this folder, we'll create another material. We'll create a prefab first called, we'll call it box prefab, because this is one of our enemies. And we'll create a material, and we'll call it box material. Let's grab our cube, drop it on here. Let's delete all these guys. And let's drop our material, drag that in there, and then let's make our box prefab a vertex lit object, and let's make the color green. And alright, so now holding Control here, I can just snap this a bunch of times. And I'm actually going to make my main camera 5. That should make it run a little smoother. There we go. Alright, that's enough for this tutorial. In the next one, we'll look at expanding on this.